Hello and welcome to our podcast, Talking Geopolitics. Today we'll discuss EU security and defense. And I am Eleanor Tellier, an EU policy researcher at Vocal Europe, and I have the pleasure to be joined by Mrs. Sophie Vanhoonacker, who will share with us her knowledge on the matter. First, I would like to introduce you more. You are an eminent professor at Maastricht University with a long repertoire of academic outputs in political science in general and EU politics field. Thank you very much for being here with us today. So you will bring to us your insight on the role you can play in the security and defense implication in Ukraine. And so I propose we start exploring the topic.
Yes, very good.
So, as you know, many donations and support and assistance have been made by the European Union and by EU member states toward Ukraine. However, the conflict is persisting and the country is still requesting assistance. So how do you think the EU, the Union and the member states can improve their help to Ukraine, and should they?
Well, first of all, thanks very much for inviting me and for this interesting question. I think it's good that you mentioned both the EU and the member states, because it is indeed a joint effort, because between on the one hand Brussels and the national capitals of the 27. And of course, a lot is being done. I think tends to be a lot of focus, of course, on the defense efforts, which is understandable since it's a war, but of course, there is a lot happening beyond that, and there are sanctions, economic sanctions being taken. There is humanitarian aid being provided, also legal support, and so also with criminal investigations. And this is one of the roles of the EU mission in Ukraine. So there is a lot of happening, and of course, I think it's also important to emphasize that depending on the stage of the war, there are different needs, and I think the EU has been able to respond to the different needs, although sometimes also being criticized for being a little bit late. Of course, we are 27 and there are different views, so sometimes it takes time, and we have seen, for example, especially Germany has had to really change its approach to Russia, also its approach to the use of the attitude towards war and supporting the fight against Russia. So, but I think, well, I would say in general, the European Union has been doing a lot, undoubtedly can still do more. But of course, I think what is most important is that we have this long-term approach, because the war is still ongoing, and hopefully at a certain moment there will be peace. And I think it will also be important that we will continue our aid beyond the war. Also the need to reconstruct the country, the criminal court against war crimes, and the investigation and prosecution of international crimes. Also, for example, an issue that we don't talk about a lot is environmental pollution. And so also the war has led to a lot of environmental problems, because the soils are being polluted with all kinds of chemicals and other materials. So indeed, a lot is happening, but a lot will still need to happen. And I think it's important that we focus on many different areas. And then, of course, the challenge is also to make sure that you coordinate what is happening in all these areas, not just amongst the EU, but also with other players like the United States, for example.
Okay, thank you for this answer. That's really interesting and well developed. So as you said, the Union is working on different matters and a lot. And for the European Union, we know that the European External Action Services is the EU diplomatic services and cannot act without the consent of the High Representative of the EU when conducting EU foreign and security policy, which is doing in Ukraine right now, but cannot exceed its competencies in military action. Yet, in the ongoing assistance to Ukraine, it would seem beneficial for the services to have a larger range of capacity. Does it seem possible to you that the EIS acquire more defense capacity?
Yeah, a very good question and interesting one. Of course, the European External Action Service is still a relatively young body, and it has been established after the Lisbon Treaty. I think it plays, as you say, the diplomatic service of the European Union. It plays also a role in the field of security, in the sense that in the EES you have the institutional support or institutional structures to support military and civilian crisis management missions. So that is also now, there is also a mission in Ukraine. So the EES in that sense is playing a role, and an important role. We also know that, of course, the EES is always understaffed, and so the member states like to pull the strings, and one of the ways to keep control over the EES is not to give it too much staff. At the same time, the EES has also been an advocate of using the European Peace Facility for actually other purposes than that were initially intended. Now we are using this peace facility also to deliver weapons to Ukraine. And you could say, well, there could be what could be a kind of role that could be played by the EES, but perhaps also by others, is that we see that there is no delivery of weapons on the one hand through the European Peace Facility, but on the other hand also the member states deliver their own weapons. So you could say there could be a coordinating role that needs to be played, and so to make sure that both streams, let's say, are in junction with each other. On the other hand, you can wonder, is this a role for the EES? Perhaps it's some have also been pleading that this should be a role for the European Defence Agency or the Commission DEFIS, and so the directorate dealing with defence issues in the and industry and space in the European Commission. So yeah, could be a role for the EES, but also for others.
Okay, so thank you again. So what you're saying, it's maybe the defense, we know that defense capacity belongs to member states individually right now, and maybe not for the EES, but we could imagine that political power capacity related to defense be granted to EU, according to you, or does it seem impossible to happen?
Yeah. So you were talking about a European role or a role for the European Union in the area of defense, huh?
Exactly.
And I think, of course, defense goes to the core of the sovereignty of the nation state, and so the member states have agreed to work together on military missions when it comes to peace building and so on. But of course, the territorial defense, on the one hand, of course, we have NATO, which plays a key role in that. And I think the war in Ukraine also has shown the increased, the continuing relevance of NATO, and also the limits of the European Union when it comes to military capabilities. This being said, I think for the long term, it is important that the European Union also does more when it comes to developing its own capabilities. And this is not like in the field of trade, where the Commission should play the leading role, where we have given up sovereignty. I think there the member states should continue to be key. And I think what is important, I think that we make steps in different areas. And so on the one hand, we have the strategic level. You know, it's important, and that has also happened now with the European Strategic Compass that was adopted in March under the French presidency, and so that we have done a kind of common threat analysis. So that was not existing in the European Union. So this is an important step at the strategic level. But then, of course, there is an important dimension of the capabilities, and also an important industrial dimension. And so there is a lot of discussion now about strategic autonomy for the European Union, so that the European Union also should have the capacities to, well, not just set its own objectives and goals, but also that the EU should then have the capacity to autonomously act and have the capabilities to do so. And there we see that some initiatives have been taken through the European, because nowadays the member states very much produce their own equipment, and there is some cooperation, but it's relatively limited. So there have been initiatives like the European Defence Fund that tries to promote cooperation or give financial support to the development of joint capabilities. There is also PESCO, the Permanent European Structured Cooperation, where also the member states, smaller groups of member states, work on joint projects, like, for example, the development of a European patrol corvette, a small warship. And this is all very, well, it takes time. It's also challenging because member states have, different, they organize the development of their industry differently. And in France, for example, the state plays an important role. This is not the case in other countries like Germany. And of course, there are also vested interests. And so if a country can develop certain weapon systems, it brings a lot of technical expertise, it brings a lot of jobs. So it's all not that easy, but steps are being made. And so on the one hand, you see at the European level, certain steps are being made. But what I find quite encouraging, and I think that's also important, is that also we see that some member states, because equipment becomes so expensive, that there is some kind of bilateral cooperation. And for example, in the Netherlands, where I'm based, there is a very close cooperation now with Germany, and you know, they have joint tanks. There is a lot of joint training now. So when it comes to territorial defense, so these are also developments. Also, for example, the Belgium and the Netherlands are also closely cooperating when it comes to the marine. So these are also interesting developments where I think, they can play a role in strengthening our capacity. And I think the current war, how unfortunately as it is, it gives some kind of new impetus to work together.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a great point of view to see that maybe defense capacity in the Union, it's getting better via intergovernmental agreements and not supranational level. But we will see what it will bring. Hope the best. But despite all the involvements of the EU and multiple countries in the world, we see that the war in Ukraine is still going on, and the country is struggling over some Russian attacks. And in regard to the current implication of the EIS in Ukraine, do you think more ambitious action could be taken?
Yeah, well, again, this is an interesting question. Of course, I think it's important that we make it very clear to Ukraine that we will support them throughout, so that we will not lose energy or lose interest. I think this is an important war because it's also about our own security and our own values. So in that sense, I think we should be ambitious and supportive. On the other hand, I think most of the population does not want this war to escalate into an all-European war. And so I think it's very good what we are doing. I think it's very important, but most people, including myself, we don't want this war to escalate. So I think it's very important to respect this narrow or thin line, actually. And I think I think we should also be reflective of what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. It was actually a hard question because we know that the Union, since it's the wars in Europe, will have to take action for the sake of our own security and Ukrainian security. That it's a thin line between the prospect of where we can act. And for this, we know that member states have provided Ukraine armed force under the human mission a lot of help, and we can see a little bit of reluctance now by EU leaders to decide to act. So since we know it's a thin line, how can you define this human Ukraine mission? Is this for you a success, an exercise to learn from, or an incomplete EU plan?
I must say I have not been following this mission very closely. So as such, I think it's important initiative. It's again one of the many initiatives of the European Union. And I think we have had this type of training missions before, also in Congo. So I think we have some experience with this. Of course, this is quite particular situation, but it's also quite ambitious because the idea is it's a 2-year mission, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, already for this year they want to train 30,000 soldiers, and we see that actually, if I'm not mistaken, 24 member states are participating. So it's also good that we have had this, we have experience since since 2003, the European Union has done missions. We have now also some small military headquarters in Brussels, which is also an important step, and the mission is also run from there. So as such, I think it's a good initiative and a strong initiative. I must say I'm not so much aware about the latest developments and potential problems. So I can actually not say anything about this.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you for your opinions. Even if you don't know specifically this mission, you gave me answer to your beliefs in the EU impact in Ukraine, and I think I can rather say that you think it's maybe not a success since the war is not over, but a great improvement for the Union.
Yeah, and of course the thing is that it's not because the war is not over that it's not a success. But I think we have to be careful that the EU can do certain things, but of course, it's not the only party. The war also depends on what Russia is doing, and as long as Russia is saying that they want to continue this war, and in the end, then of course we can try what we want. And so in that sense, it's a rather complex situation. And many parties are involved, and of course the EU is one of the parties, but of course the two key parties are of course Russia and Ukraine, and of course the Americans of course also play a very important role. And so I think we should also not underestimate what the US has been doing. I think it's also thanks to the Americans that actually we are in a situation where Ukraine has not been fully occupied. The courage of the Ukrainian people has been crucial as well, of course. They are the first players there. But of course, however courageous one can be, you need the technical assistance. And there, of course, the Americans have been a crucial factor.
Yeah, well, thank you.